one day I got to the conclusion that maybe I didn't have to choose between being a Christian and being a agnostic, but actually I could be the two of them at the same time. Like you can be a Christian and be an agnostic together, because we all have these two dimensions. Like we all need God in a way, but on the other hand, we have doubts. And rather than choosing between faith and doubts, I I got to the conclusion that I should try to integrate the two of them.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Christianity Integrated Podcast, a channel which integrates Christian wisdom into your everyday life. And today we're joined by Henry, a language teacher who's going to be talking about his experiences with faith. Hi, Henry, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all good, thank you. Glad that you're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to get into it, what would you say your journey was like growing up with Christianity? Were you a believer or were you not? How was it?
I think faith has been present in my life since I was a child. Like I was born into a rather religious family, and I went to a Catholic school as well. So when I was young, faith was always present. I mean, we used to pray sometimes as a family. My parents told me like stories from the Bible, and we went to church together on Sundays. And yeah, my school was pretty religious as well. So I was teaching about the Christian faith, and I'd say I was a relatively religious person during my childhood.
Thank you for that. And how did that progress throughout your sort of adolescence and into adulthood? Did you want to go into Christianity as a career in any way, for example?
No, not as a career. It was more probably when I left school and I went to university, and I found a rather different place and different people from quite varied backgrounds. I started questioning my faith, and probably because I had been taking it for granted in the past. It was just what my family had taught me, what most of my friends believed, what my school taught me about. When I found a place where people were having different ways of approaching life, I started questioning my own. I would also say that at that time, I just saw religion as something like it was like a prison, really, because it was more focused on morals and the things you couldn't do. Like there were loads of like rules and prohibitions of things that were bad or a sin. So I felt like my religion was constraining me and was not allowing me to explore the world and find out by myself what was good and bad. And probably that's why I gradually left at least religious practice. I'd never say I became like really like an atheist or agnostic. I did not reject the idea of faith, but I wanted to explore other things. And I also tried exploring other faiths as well, other religions, trying to figure out by myself what was the right way for me. And another factor at that time was like when I started struggling in life with like everyday struggles like stress, anxiety, that sort of stuff. And I turned to my religion asking for a solution and help. I didn't find it there. I mean, what I found was like a list of commandments. And despite I tried to pray to God to help me with my feelings, they didn't change. So at that time, I found the religious I had learned was not helpful to face daily problems.
See, so for you, it was like more restrictive than actually allowing you to help you in some sort of way.
Yeah, I would say that was it.
Okay, cool. And then based on that, what other faiths or philosophies or whatever did you explore? Did you find something else which was more helpful, or what happened?
I'd say I tried loads of things, but I was particularly interested in Eastern religions, particularly Buddhism and Hinduism, because what I wanted at the time was to be able to control my mind and my thoughts and find inner peace and stillness. So, and I had a God as is traditionally performed by Christianity, which is like a personal God, like a God that is like a person you could talk to, was not really appealing at the time. And I prefer to see more or an Eastern approach where the whole reality was God in a way, more than a like thinking about a personal God you could talk to.
You spoke about having doubts in faith. Was there a particular reason for this, or why was there such difficulty in this instance?
Yeah, I've been through periods of doubt since I was in my 20s, since I went to university. And yeah, I think I can expand more about them when we go through my own personal journey. Because, after university, lots of things happened, and probably it will be more interesting to discuss doubts when I tell you what happened next.
Okay, cool. Let's go through the sort of personal journey. So, what initially happened after university?
After university, I started working in my city, and then I mean, at that time, I was not like a practicing Christian anymore. I would call myself vaguely a Christian because I was always close to the figure of Jesus. Mainly, I saw it as a good example of for life, not necessarily as the Son of God or like any dogmatic definition, but
Mhm.
he was still like a person that would inspire me, and that was what I would see myself at the time. And then I was granted a grant to go to Germany to do some research, and it was a new, really new upheaval for me. Like everything was new. I was in a different place, and one day I passed through a church, and I went in, and it was all like quiet, and there were candles and a little group of people praying, and I found the place so peaceful that suddenly I realized that was like home. And no matter where I was, like I was in Germany, but it was a home that I could find anywhere. And since that time, I gradually started going back to church.
Since you started going back to church, was there a change between your previous self, as you said you weren't really a practicing Christian, and now that you found this sort of more peaceful church?
Originally, it was basically the church was like a place, a haven where I could find peace, and there was beauty around it. Like the music was beautiful. I think because in Germany and England and like these countries, like music, the musical tradition is much better than how we sing in Spain. And and there were loads of young people as well because it was a university chapel. And yeah, there was a sense of community. People were kind to each other, and it was a time to sit and just be alone with your thoughts. Probably that was it at the time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say at that time I had changed my perspective of what I was. Probably I had just found a place where I could find some peace, and a place that I could call home as well.
That's nice. And then after your experience in Germany, what did you do after that, and how did your faith develop?
Yeah. So yeah, I write my diaries, and I can, when I check what I was thinking at the time, was basically what I said. I had found a place of peace, basically, but my self identification of what I was, self identity, hadn't changed. But then after Germany, I realized I didn't want to go back to Spain. I wanted to travel more, and by chance, my sister was living in Oxford, and I thought, why not move in there and try to improve my English? And so I took a plane and I flew. It was a bit winged, to be honest. And I arrived there and I started looking for a place to stay. And I accompanied my sister to church on Sunday. And I mean, there I was completely amazed by the beauty of that church. Like the liturgy was outstanding. The music was beautiful. The church was so quaint and peaceful. And so I loved it, since it was love from first sight.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And looking at your time in England, was there any sort of difference which made you think differently about faith? Was it, for example, you said the church, or was it prayer? Was it reading the Bible? Was it something that stood out?
Yeah. So yeah, I started reading the Bible more consistently. I started reading books about Christianity.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a library. I there were, it had a advanced section of religious books. So I started reading loads of them. And I think the most important thing was that I spent loads of time in prayer. So inside the church, I mentioned in silence, and I gradually felt like a presence of, let's say, God. Like I felt God existed, God was close. And then, I mean, something changed. I just felt I had changed. I had become a different person. And even the people around me, particularly my sister, they were always asking, what happened to you? Like, you look like you're floating, you're always smiling. What has happened to you?
See, so do you think for you that was a religious experience?
That was, yeah, it was a religious experience where I felt suddenly very close to God, and where it was obvious that God was there, that God loved me, that He existed, and I wanted to be with Him all the time. It was a rather strong experience.
Okay, that's pretty incredible. And
Yeah.
since that experience, would you say anything has changed, or would you say that your faith has sort of strengthened from that perspective?
I mean, at that time, I thought it was very strong, and it was so strong that I thought I wanted to give my whole life to God, and I didn't want to do anything else, like anything apart from this, like finding a girlfriend or having a family or a job. All these things seemed petty,
Mm.
and the only thing I wanted to do was to be with God and to give my life to God. And at that time, I thought the most logical way was to become a priest. And I that's the reason why I entered the seminary, which is, yeah, where priests are trained. So after 2 years living in England, I moved back to Spain and I joined a seminary.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And then what happened? Did you become a priest later on?
No, I didn't become a priest. So I guess after a few years, that strong experience started to I would say wear out. So the feelings became weaker, and I also found at the seminary, like people coming from a very different experience than the one I have had. Maybe some of them have been like growing in around parish life, particularly they were close or to a religious community or a movement. Whereas in my case, it has been more like a personal experience, but I didn't have that connection to a parish church or to a group of people. I would say that that was a big contrast. And also in the seminary, loads big focus was put on the externals. I mean, in performing rites and rituals, like I mean, because as priest, you're expected to be the person like celebrating mass or weddings or other ceremonies. So a lot of the focus was put on those external things.
I see. That makes sense. And then because you didn't become a priest, did that lead you to a different direction in terms of faith, or did it affect in any way?
Yeah. So as I said, a few years later, I mean, seminary is meant to last 7 years in total, which is a long time. And
Okay.
I completed 5 years.
Mhm.
And after 1 or 2 years, my strong feelings, the ones that led me to join the seminary, they vanished and they went no longer there. And I started questioning everything, even the existence of God. And I started worrying, how would I be able to be in a church, in a parish, when I was probably going to be the person with the weakest faith and and be surrounded by people that would probably be much more religious than me. And yeah, I mean, other things happened. I remember one day I was reading the book Brothers Karamazov,
Mhm.
and it portrays the story of three brothers, and the youngest of them, which is the main character, is Alyosha. And he is a person that is a rather spiritual person and joins a monastery as a novice. And at that monastery, there is a very old and wise starets, which is the name they give to the monks that are like spiritual masters. And and he wants to be a monk and be monastery. But when his old starets, who is called Sosima, is about to die, is lying on his bed, dying, then the starets tells Alyosha, I know who you are, and I don't want you to be the monastery. I would like you to go back to the world and live in the world like a monk. And then when the monk dies, Alyosha leaves the monastery in the night, and he kneels and kisses the soil and cries. And that scene was quite strong, and it gave me a hint of that probably my way was different.
See. Okay. And since you alluded to a bit of Dostoevsky there, would you say that he or any other kind of philosopher has influenced your faith and your beliefs about Christianity?
Yes. Another writer that was very influential was Kierkegaard,
Mhm.
and he defines a vocation as becoming who you really are.
Okay.
So developing your real self and be the best person you can, but yourself. And when I was at the seminary, I just that didn't match really what was going on there, because I was trying to become a person, a representative of the church, which had to perform certain rituals that I didn't felt were very important to me, and be a church representative and say the things the church teaches. And people would look at me as a priest, not as the person I was.
Yeah.
So I gradually realized I was becoming like an actor,
Hmm.
playing a role rather than being my real self. So that understanding of vocation was also a reason that finally led me to leave the seminary at a certain point.
It's really interesting because I haven't really heard about it from that perspective, in the sense that you kind of felt that you weren't really being true to yourself. And that actually was pulled you away from what you're supposed to do. And I guess just briefly talk about my own journey as well. I felt like I haven't really been able to be fully open about my experiences with God. I've spoken before about my doubts with faith and things like that. And I think that it's important to be able to have maybe someone to go to, or some sort of community where you understand, that other people understand that you have your differences. You don't necessarily always fit in that same mold. So I'm really happy that you shared that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just wondering, during this period of where you were, let's say, doubting about faith, did you have anyone who you could maybe go to or talk to, or community in that sense?
Let me think about it. Well, of course, I had books.
Mhm.
Like I could read books, and sometimes the writers were the people I talked to. Like, well, I will mention some of these books later, and also the last year I spent at the seminary, I got in touch with a Jesuit spiritual director, and I told him that I was doubting about leaving the seminary, and he accepted to guide me through that process. So we would meet regularly, like every week or fortnightly, and he gave me some passages of the Bible to read and meditate. So I would say he was the person I trusted the most about what was going on.
Okay. And then kind of going on from what you said there, were there any particular biblical passages or scripture which influenced your beliefs at the time, or thought that maybe helped you?
That time, mm, no, not at that time. I think at that time the Bible had become a book I was reading and hearing so much that it didn't it lost its strength at the
Okay.
time, because I was at the seminary. I was hearing the Bible every day, and people were speaking about it all the time. So I would say I got used to it, and it kind of lost its strength at the time. But there was a verse of the Bible that was powerful, but not at that time, maybe a bit later.
Okay, I see. So it wasn't really helpful then, but later on
I
it
think I
came.
was a bit, well, it's kind of like a burnout syndrome. So
Mhm.
I was
Yeah.
burned out of religion because I had it all the time,
Mhm.
24/7. Like I was surrounded by people talking about religion, and everything was about religion. So I got to a point where I was burned out of it.
See, is that why you kind of went on to philosophy a bit more, or were you already interested in that?
I was very interested in philosophy, and as part of the seminary studies, you do 2 years of philosophy.
And
I mean, probably at the time, I was probably drawn into like Nietzsche or the sort of
okay,
negationist. Yeah, probably because I was at a with a very rebel state.
yeah, okay, yeah. Let's go into that then with it, Nietzsche. How did that affect your faith? Because I asked this as I've had like a similar experience when I was doubting a lot about God, and then sort of watched a few videos and learned a bit more about these different types of philosophers, kind of going back to what I did in A level, GCSE, whatever. So I'm interested to hear about whether that affected your faith in any way.
I mean, for example, one of the favorite philosophies was Montaigne, and I really found loads of similarities between he and myself.
Okay.
And at what point he says, like, faith is something given to you by God, and it's not the result of your thoughts. So that gave me like a sense of peace, because regardless of how much I questioned the faith, it did not depend on me and my struggles. It depended on God. And if I had to have faith, he would give it to me. And it didn't matter that much, like how my my inner struggles were developing. He was a good philosopher that helped the time.
Okay, well, that's interesting. And do you think that, I don't know, the church could do more to help people who are going through periods of doubt?
Yeah. So to be honest, my doubt, my strongest periods of doubt did not happen while I was at the seminary. They happened when I left.
I see. Okay, right.
Because I mean, when I was at the seminary, I had somehow doubts, but mainly what I was really contemplating was whether I should stay and be a priest or leave the seminary and do something else. And at that time, doubting God was not that strong as it was later when I left. And finally, the 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 last the last straw
Mhm.
was one day when I had to go to the optician. Is optician
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, that's right. Mhm.
Yeah, because I had to fix my glasses, and I had to be at the cathedral with all my fellow seminarians forming a service. But I couldn't attend because I had to go to the optician. And when I got my glasses repaired, I went back to the cathedral, and the ceremony had already started. And I saw from the entrance all the seminarians and priests on the high altar. And I saw them from the entrance of the cathedral with perspective that I was not there anymore. I was at the entrance with the other people, maybe curious people that were just popping in to see what was going on. And I suddenly realized that was the place for me. Like, I wanted to be with those that were not that close to the church, but were maybe trying to peek in through to see what was going on. And I suddenly knew that was the place for me. And the structure of the church is mainly preparing priests to be sent to a parish and to be taking care of people that are already religious. But
Yeah.
what about the people that don't go to church?
Mhm.
And suddenly I realized that becoming a priest was more an obstacle rather than a means to achieve what I felt was my own personal calling.
See, that's okay. That's interesting. So it's like because being a priest is so kind of structured, you have to believe X, Y, and Z. There's no sort of space for a malleability of different beliefs. So you kind of, as you said earlier, you're kind of fixed towards a position that it's not really who you are.
Yeah, because I mean, you're meant to be saying what the church is teaching and
Mhm.
doing what the church or the parish goers expect from the priest, and they're not gonna see you as Henry. They're gonna see you as Father wherever. And
Yeah.
if you not behave like this or you say something odd, they will just probably find it weird, and you're gonna be criticized. So it was a lot of pressure, and I didn't like that.
Okay. That makes sense. And then since you weren't going to become a priest anymore, did you think there was another vocation which would suit you better or just no vocation at all?
So, I mean, as I said, I was kind of like contemplating that my vocation was getting close to the people that may have an interest for spiritual things and maybe
Mm.
looking for something. So would be on the search, but that wouldn't call themselves like churchgoers.
Kind of like
And
sneakers.
at that time, I saw the example of the Apostle Paul,
Okay.
who saw himself as the apostle of the Gentiles.
Hmm.
And he wanted to go to the Greeks and the Romans
Hmm.
and preach the gospel there.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, he was an inspiration. But I mean, I was not sure how that was gonna take form, and it was a hard period because I had to suddenly start from scratch and just figure out what I wanted to do as a profession, where I was going to live, and lots of decisions. And also it was hard when you think something is your calling and you realize it's not. That's also a part of a personal crisis. I would say darkest periods in faith came after that, because when I left the seminary, I was so burnt out of religion that I thought I had had enough. So I stopped going to church again, and I didn't feel like reading about religion anymore, or the Bible, or anything. I think I was saturated
Okay.
from it.
Okay. Cool. And then, so basically now you're sort of like kind of done with Christianity. As you said, you're saturated with it. You've done all you can, but it hasn't quite worked out for you. What did you do next? And have you continued that stance, or have you come back closer towards faith?
Okay. So I went through a gradual process
Yeah.
for several months or even a year. I didn't want to go to church anymore. I was tired of it. But then I realized I kind of needed like a spiritual grounding, and I had like mixed feelings about God. I felt he had betrayed me. So I had tried to give him my whole life, and suddenly I thought he had abandoned me, and I felt like an outcast. So I think I addressed all my raids towards God. I was angry with him, like, why did you do this to me? I was trying to be a priest, I was trying to follow you, and suddenly you've left me. So
Yeah.
there was a long time, a long period of time where when I was angry with God, until quite maybe 2 years ago. I left the seminary about 8 years ago. So probably the first 6 years were hard. I was angry with God. I I didn't go to church. Then gradually I started going a bit while I was still angry with God. So it's taken me a lot to find out a new way of understanding faith and religion.
Okay. And just alluding to what you said earlier, why did you decide to go to church again after roughly 6 years?
What happened? Yeah, I will tell you. I kind of like started swaying between being a Christian again. Though I had periods when I had a revival of faith when I started flicking through the Bible again. I have it here. and reading about religion. But there were other periods where my old ghost came back again, and I tried to pray, but then I started being angry with God again. And so I had periods when I would call myself a Christian, and other periods where I would call it myself an agnostic, because I didn't know if I believed or not, if it was all true or it was like a bad joke. So I was kind of like trying to figure out what I was. And then one day I got to the conclusion that maybe I didn't have to choose between being a Christian and being a agnostic, but actually I could be the two of them at the same time. Like you can be a Christian and be an agnostic together, because we all have these two dimensions. Like we all need God in a way, but on the other hand, we have doubts. And rather than choosing between faith and doubts, I I got to the conclusion that I should try to integrate the two of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that what you mean by the kind of like new way you looked at faith?
Yeah, that's been the way I've been living in the past months, years, and I would say I'm still trying to develop that way. That was maybe one of the reason I was a bit reluctant to do this interview, because I see my own philosophy as still an evolving thing, and
Mhm.
I'm not sure if maybe in a couple of months I watch the interview and maybe I don't recognize myself anymore.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's a really important point that, first of all, faith and doubt aren't sort of mutually exclusive in the sense that you can have both, like it's biblical. Even I think it says in Mark chapter 9, verse 24 about, I believe, help my unbelief. So it's in there, even in the Psalms, so many different stories talking about it. And I think that sometimes it can actually be really helpful because you're focusing on actually trying to take your faith seriously and truly seeing if you believe it for what it is. So I just want to, yeah, show that message that it's not a bad thing. I've been through it, you've been through it. I'm sure so many others have as well. So hopefully be able to create that space where people can explore it without any judgment, without feeling that they're a bad person for doubting or any of those sorts of things. So that's, yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast, to just show that that's not an error or something wrong. Actually, it can be a sign that you're taking your faith really seriously.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's why I always find your videos and your podcast quite a helpful inspiration, and it's good to see that I'm not alone in this.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Because, yeah, that's one thing that I felt definitely quite alone in it when I did it. And I know that it's not the case, just that people haven't been able to necessarily see that content. So hopefully this should be able to help with that.
So the biblical verse you quote was that passage of Mark
Mhm.
where the father of a boy with a spirit, he asked Jesus to deliver his son, and he says, Lord, I believe, help in my unbelief. So I think that's probably the verse I was gonna say,
Mhm.
because that perfectly combines these two dimensions, faith and doubts, that go together. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of things I can say about that, but I think really, probably, I mean, in my view, that's the the real way one should believe, when one contemplates that God is not evident. It's not an evidence, and there's always wide room for uncertainty. And if you see life, there's no way why there should be a God. Like we see this world, we all face struggles and limits, and one day we would die. So how can we know that there is a God? Just because a book says so, but that's a book, right? Someone wrote it, and maybe they claim to be inspired, or they claim it was a revelation, but how can we be sure of that? What proofs are there? That at the end of the day, it's like our own decision whether we believe or not, but I don't think it can be based on evidence at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it's called faith. It's not a certainty, but it's whether or not you believe in your hearts. So I'm happy that you shared that. And kind of just talking about this almost integration of faith and agnosticism, do you think there are any ways that Christianity can still be helpful, even if you don't believe in God at all? Let's say you're an atheist.
Yes, well, I think atheist is a serious word, because you're denying the possibility of change. But I prefer to, I mean, at least when I speak about myself, I prefer to see myself as agnostic, because
Mm.
I think saying I don't know, it's better to say there's not a God, because we cannot know for sure whether there is a God or not. And the difference is that when you are agnostic, there's still some room for change. Maybe you don't think there is a God, but you're always open to change your mind. That's in my view. And your question was whether the church can be helpful to people that find it difficult to believe in God in the traditional sense. And my answer is that, of course, there is. One way is seeing Jesus as an example, and
Mhm.
that was probably what I did when I was much younger. I saw Jesus as a person to try to make the life of others better, and that he tried to make this world a better place and try to alleviate suffering, and could try to be with those who were less protected, and with the simple, the innocent, and that I think can be a meaningful way of living, trying to live for love and service to other. And I think that inspiration can come from the New Testament, particularly, despite one might not be sure whether there is a God or not. And I think even though they might not be a God, if you live like this, you're gonna have a much more meaningful and happy life.
100%. I think that that's kind of what happened to me in the sense of I was like, okay, I'm not 100% sure about God existing, but I'm very sure that Jesus is the best example I can follow. And I think that for me, at least it's much more of like a lived experience. And the more you try and, I guess, follow him or read what he says and integrate it into your life, I do generally think that, at least for me personally, that's kind of strengthened my faith. So it's really interesting to look at Jesus from that perspective.
There's another way I wanted to mention. I think there's also necessary to rediscover the mystical aspect of the faith. Because when you go to church, it's very rare that you hear people really speaking about the human heart and the soul. You it's more likely to hear people just paraphrasing the Bible, or in the Catholic tradition speaking about the Virgin Mary and the saints. But not much is said about that mystical path that has always been there in Christianity. And the first thing about the mystics, and my probably the favorite one, is a German mystic called Meister Eckhart. And they speak in God in negative terms. So they say God is incomprehensible, and
Oh, right, like
you,
that.
yeah, like God, you cannot know really much about him, and he is beyond concepts
Mhm.
and words and definitions. And probably the best attitude towards him is just wait in silence in his presence. And in order to reach God, you should rather go into your heart. And when you try to find who you really are, that's where God is waiting for you. So rather than learning new things and concepts, you should really take them away and try to get to the center of who you really are. And that's where you're gonna find God.
See, so it's more like kind of looking within, being in like a quiet time, which I guess in today's world, there's so many different distractions. It's quite hard to do that.
It is hard, but you can do it also while you're doing other things. Like I liked praying with like a short prayer. And
Mhm.
there is like when I think I spoke to you about this, which is The Cloud of the Unknowing. And it's a medieval English Christian text. And it's in that line of the mystics. And the author recommends just saying in a short word, which can be God or Jesus or love. And he recommends you just repeat the word.
Okay.
And that might be helpful anywhere when you're walking, when you're doing your house chores. And it's not necessary that you find a really quiet time place or space. You can do that everywhere and at all times.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that before. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Pleasure.
I'm just wondering, do you have any advice for someone who is in that kind of place of agnosticism or in between faith and doubt?
Yes. I think maybe we should try to change the definition of what faith is.
Okay.
So maybe we tend to think as faith as being sure about the existence of God or about what the Bible or the church teaches. And if it makes sense and you feel confident about it, then you have faith. But maybe I've tried to create a different definition of faith. And I try to see faith as the decision to be there and to remain there, despite you don't understand, despite your doubts, but still you decide to be there, waiting. And if you have doubts, I think that can be a good definition you can apply, because you're still trying to look, you're still searching, and that decision to just take the next step, that's faith in a way. That I took that idea from a theologian that I really like, who is Paul Tillich. And he has a book which is called The Courage to Live. And he defines faith as that trust that just makes us take the next step rather than running away or being paralyzed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that kind of reminds me of something said in Hebrews about faith being and confidence in what you don't know or something like that. Can't remember.
Yeah, that's
But yeah,
in Hebrews 11, I think.
yes, I think so.
Yeah.
11 something, I can't remember. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting that, because you're right. I think sometimes it can be thought that faith is absolute certainty when it's not. That's the whole point of the journey, but still having the courage to continue to walk in it, I think, can be really helpful, and definitely would have helped me a few years ago as well. But
That's what I would tell someone with doubts. Don't be scared of your doubts. Accept them as part of who you are, and try to think that maybe that's a real way of believing. And another example from the New Testament is that Jesus said, if you have faith like a little mustard seed, then
Mhm.
you might move mountains.
Mhm.
So figure out that a mustard seed is such a small seed. So Jesus is not asking you for a big faith. He's asking you for just a very small faith. And that is enough, because that's what he's asking us for.
That's really good. Yeah, it kind of grows little by little and then compounds. Yeah, nice. But yeah, that's been really interesting. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Like, I've really enjoyed hearing your journey, your story, your perspective, and I'm sure it will help other people in the audience too.
Thank you for the opportunity given.
No worries.
Okay, bye.
Take care.